Hey, podcast listeners, Jeff here. Before we start, I want to let you know about a promo at our sponsor, Wisma Bahasa. They're offering 2 free online lessons when you sign up for a course of 20. 3 if you sign up for 30. Use Reformasi and the promo code there on the website. There's more detail in the show notes. Okay, now on to the show.
This podcast was recorded at 8:15 a.m. April 12th, Jakarta time. Things may have changed by the time you hear this or see this. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Reformasi Dispatch, Episode 1, Season 2. I'm Jeff Hutton, regional correspondent for the Straits Times of Singapore. Don't cut me off, Kevin. It's been so long.
Trying.
No, you just wait to get in. Hey, this is Kevin O'Rourke
from Reformasi Weekly.
Reformasi. The engine room, the brains of the entire operation, because God knows I am nothing without his intel.
It takes a village.
Today, we got G20. We've got subsidies. We've got former U.S. ambassador to Indonesia, Robert Blake. And that was a really good one. We just wrapped that up, actually, about half an hour ago. I didn't embarrass myself too much. He came on and talked about decommissioning coal-fired power plants and said that there's a reason to be optimistic.
Yep. He had just taken a trip to Jakarta. He is an assistant for the team in the U.S. government under the Special Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. And so Ambassador Blake had some incredible perspectives about his meetings with officials and ministers in Indonesia about energy transition.
He didn't look me up. He didn't send a message when go out at all. He just came and went. So I'm not taking that personally. It's fine. It's fine. Look, I'm sure he's busy. But the takeaway I had from our conversation was that, you look at the progress that Indonesia has made, really, really big existential issues. Deforestation, the fires from 2015. And then the ambassador didn't say this specifically, but, that also runs parallel to Indonesia's more or less good handling of COVID-19. Not as bad as in other places, much better than we had feared. That there is the organizational capacity. There is every reason to expect for the country to get behind in full embrace of renewable energy if there's the political will. And I'm not sure if that's there yet.
Right. Yeah. And but the good thing is that the talks are happening, and that's very constructive. And yeah, it's one of those things. Always with climate change, you look at the rate of progress relative to where things were a year or 2 years ago, and it's pretty breathtaking how far things have come along. But then on the other hand, if you look at just the sheer scale of the problem and scope, it's daunting. But what Widodo has said repeatedly is, "Where's the money?" And then here, what we're hearing in this interview, spoiler alert, is where's the reform?
Yeah. We got the billions, we got the bucks, but we
need the bankable projects.
Yeah, but before that, we gotta have need the reform, right? Just before we get any further, Stephen has alerted us that the RUPKS, the Sexual Assault Crimes Bill, is due to pass Parliament today. It is Tuesday. So we're going to know more about that once we've published on Wednesday morning, Jakarta time. There's been a little bit of a movable feast. The definition of rape has been up in the air. What's illegal, what's not legal, consensual sex, non-consensual sex has been a bone of contention. What are you going to be looking for when the final law comes out?
This is going to be one piece of the puzzle, and another important one potentially in the relatively near future is a revision finally of the very antiquated criminal code, the KUHP, which is the one that actually already outlaws rape. So there may be headlines saying that this new bill, the UUTPKS, fails to definitively prohibit rape. Part of the reason for that, though, is that that is one of the few things that's actually already in the KUHP. So the distinction between consensual and non-consensual sex is really important, because if there's no distinction there, then potentially it's possible to get in trouble one way or the other, reputationally or legally or so on, for engaging in intercourse that's non-consensual as the victim. So that's why that distinction is important. And at one stage, it was taken out, and so there was no distinction in the draft, and that was to placate some of the religiously conservative parties. Remains to be seen if it's put back in again or not. But in any event, this, even with some flaws and shortcomings and so on, and some missed opportunities, this should be a really huge step forward in a critical area that's really been missing this type of legislation that really focuses on the rights of victims. That's the main aim of this piece of legislation.
Also, the bill addresses the premise, and that's that women in this country cannot study, cannot work without fear of sexual harassment. They get blamed. They're told to forget it ever happened and just stay quiet. And now that Indonesia is having that discussion, and it's a potentially a great day.
Yeah.
President Joko Widodo has put to rest mostly talk of postponing the 2024 election. He had it out, a recent cabinet meeting, telling the great all and sundry to knock it off, basically. He stopped short of doing a full LBJ. I think it was LBJ who said, if elected, I will not serve.
Yeah.
Why? Why
Yeah.
do we say it?
Yeah, that's kind of funny. Yeah, normally you don't want to see somebody go full LBJ, but yeah, in this case it would have been good. And so yeah, he stopped short again and truncated his stance, as it were. But at least he went further than the last couple of times when he merely said that it's critical to abide by the Constitution. That's what he said in the past a couple of times, and that was important because at least it really downplayed the prospects for and some extra constitutional power grab, but it left open the window of amending the Constitution such that he could abide by the amended Constitution and postpone elections that way if enough parties supported him. So, as we know, ministers, several of them, they're pushing very hard for an amendment to postpone elections. And finally, at a very late stage, the president came out on 6 April and said definitively at a cabinet meeting, stop talking about it. And this was following an event that appeared staged by Coordinating Minister Luhut Panjaitan, who's an advisor to an organization that ostensibly represents community heads, or Kepala Desa. There's 70,000 Kepala Desa in the country. And the president attended this rally, and afterwards the head of the group, DPP Abdesi is the name of the group, came out and called for a third term for Widodo. And so it made it look as if this was all designed to create the appearance that grassroots support exists for extending Widodo's tenure, when in fact, good, credible, accurate poll data shows quite the opposite. So that was very unsettling, and it took an extra week until this 6th of April cabinet meeting before the president came out and signaled that ministers need to drop the issue and stop talking about it. And that's important because if they can't talk about it, then this small group of ministers is no longer going to be able to campaign openly and try to sway public opinion and create the impression that there's popular support, which is what the parties want to see before they embark on amendment.
There's a school of thought there, Kevin, that hey, if it's what people want, then what's the problem? If there is an amendment to the Constitution and Joko runs again and he gets enough votes to become president again, who are we to judge? What's the problem?
Well, it would just set the precedent of amending the Constitution to serve the interest of whoever's in power. Ideally, an amendment like that should take effect 10 years down the road rather than benefiting the office holder who has enormous powers of patronage at their disposal. Plus, yeah, tinkering with the Constitution in that way would likely just pave the way for a lifelong dictatorship in reality.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you, but I've been having this discussion in way chat groups and emails, and I've been seeing discussion of is it a problem? Is it not a problem? And it's yeah, actually it is. Um, you tinker with the Constitution as it suits you, and maybe Joko Widodo does have the goodwill of the people, and he could probably get a third term if he ran. I don't know. But what about the next guy, a woman who doesn't have the interests of the country? I mean, it's only been 20 years since democracy was invented. It's a little too soon to be doing that.
Yeah. Term limits are important. They're a useful tool, especially in a setting where the state owns so much of the economy. State-owned enterprises are gigantic here, so whoever's in the presidency ultimately can command those companies, which in some cases constitute entire economic sectors in and of themselves. And so there's just a gigantic incentive to stay in power once one is in power. That's the utility of term limits in that kind of a context.
Isn't it great that the vast majority of Indonesian people don't want any part of this? That just makes me love being a reporter here.
Absolutely, yeah. The public is aware of these things. Yeah, they're plugged in and clued in and cognizant and interested. So, yeah, the polls show that by a margin of well over 2-1, almost 3-1, people oppose the idea of amending the Constitution to extend Widodo's tenure. And Widodo is very popular right now. That's true. He's got approval rating of, it's come down a bit, but it's still in about the mid 60s, which is enviable for any world leader. However, the thing is that rating would collapse if he were to push for an amendment to stay in power. He's popular primarily because people see him as a symbol of democracy, and 3/4 of Indonesians still support democracy.
Well, and it's that's a sentence you haven't been hearing much of lately.
Yeah.
You know, 2/3 of a country supporting democracy. Wow. Do you want to riff a little bit on some of the polls that have been coming out since we took hiatus? Looking like the three front runners still comfortably the three front runners.
Yeah, there's a lot of stasis or stability in the polls since the last good one, which was a while ago, which was conducted in December, so just before the Omicron wave. And then with the Omicron wave, there was no in-person polling. And so this is the first good one that came out last week, and it was from Indicator Politik. It was conducted in mid-February, in person nationwide, and it showed that the rankings are still the same. So Prabowo and Ganjar Pranowo, the Central Java governor, in a virtual tie for first, with the defense minister Prabowo slightly ahead, but within the error margin of the poll of 3%. And then Anies Baswedan not too far behind in third place, and that's pretty much the same as it was before. Prabowo may have softened a little bit. Ganjar has remained stable. What's interesting about it is that the name recognition for Ganjar is still at 65%, and that constitutes upside potential for him because the name recognition nationwide for Prabowo is 98%. So basically, Ganjar is already on par with Prabowo, even though he only has 2/3 of the country from which to draw support, because 1/3 of Indonesians don't even know who Ganjar is. And as they find out between now and election time, at least some of them are going to support him, probably quite a lot. Actually, the poll shows that among people who know of Ganjar, he is overwhelmingly the favorite, and Prabowo is weaker, and Baswedan is about the same. So that suggests that as Ganjar becomes more well known, at least some people are going to gravitate to him and shift away from Prabowo, and that should be enough to vault him ahead of Prabowo. Other things being equal, there's a lot else that can change between now and then, of course.
Looks
So,
like
pretty positive results for Ganjar, basically.
it looks like the PDIP Megawati tug of war, and there was a rock quarry issue that was blowing up in his face that hasn't had the political impact.
Well, hard to say. Yeah, this polling took place just after that story broke, and it's a lingering problem for Ganjar because lots of times when he makes a public appearance somewhere in Central Java or Jogja, there'll be a gathering of students demonstrating about the Wadas quarry and protesting the plans to level a large part of this bucolic community in Central Java to mine rock for a dam nearby. This is a central government project. So it's going to be a lingering problem for Ganjar, and unfortunately, it seems like there's not a whole lot he can do about it. And it may have halted some of his upward momentum in the polls, potentially, I think.
Well, it's so good that he's got the support of his party, though.
Yeah, right. Yeah, one of the senior PDIP parliamentarians actually recommended that the people of WADA should file criminal charges against the governor. This is his party colleague. So yeah, there's some really deep rifts there in the party. So Ganjar is not going to get his nomination for president from PDIP. It's got to come from somebody else.
It's just there's no chance. Yeah, I mean,
I don't think so. No, I mean, yeah, no one has said that. They haven't ruled it out clearly, but the alliance that's brewing between PDIP and Prabowo's Gurindra continues to strengthen. So it looks like a Prabowo Puan Maharani ticket. So therefore, Ganjar is going to have to get enlisted by an alliance of 3 other parties. And that could be NASDEM, Democrat, but they still need one other. And Golkar and PKB are 2 big candidates for that. But they've been preoccupied with fighting for extending Widodo's term. So very unclear if they're going to be willing now to swing over to backing Ganjar instead.
I want to get to G20 in a second. First of all, I wanted to talk about subsidies. And I thought that we had put this all to rest back in 2014, 2015, when there was some relaxation, some market movement of the petrol prices, benzene. But now, we talked with Finance Minister Sri Muryani, and she said that there's ample windfall from the commodities exports to make it easier to target subsidies to the poor and the vulnerable. And that makes intuitive sense. You did some calculation, though, in the most recent newsletter that said it's not just, but if it is targeted, it is a really big bomb, because we're looking at spending of something like 3.7% of GDP on subsidies. That's great for inflation, but the opportunity cost is that's money that could be put towards infrastructure and services. Are we going back, and it's very hard to take away once you've given it, are we going back to an addiction to subsidies? And can you give us a sense of just how much money the government plans to be pumping into the economy?
Right. Yeah. It's a pretty sizable problem. This is because of the high price of oil right now. So what I did was some calculations using current price levels, extrapolating them through the remainder of this year, which is just a basic way of looking at it, because prices may change between now and then, depending especially on what happens in Ukraine. But as things stand now, Indonesia is on track to spend an awful lot on energy subsidies, probably close to 500 trillion rupiah. And that is the equivalent of a lot of solar panels, by the way. However, compared to about 10 years ago when subsidies were really bad, the GDP has grown a lot. So as a share of GDP, it's still not as bad as it was in 2011 when subsidies were almost 3.5% of GDP in 2011, 2012. Um, Now, energy subsidies at present, if conditions last to the end of the year, would end up at around 2.7% of GDP, probably. That includes some various assumptions on my part. Note, however, that there's additional subsidies beyond energy subsidies, a lot of food subsidies, fertilizer subsidies. So those bring the whole thing up to 3.7%. But if we're talking about just energy alone, then right now it's getting close to 3% just for energy. And the government can afford that because of this windfall from revenues from the high prices of commodities that it exports, or taxes like palm oil and especially coal, minerals. However, it's just basically a wasted opportunity to do something better with that windfall, whether it's energy transition or social protection. The president wants to move the capital, of course. The defense minister wants to buy weapon systems. So there's a lot of competing priorities for this windfall. And instead, right now, it's being spent on subsidies for fuel, not just diesel, known as solar, confusingly, but also petrol, especially the product known as pertalite. So the government confirmed that it's going to be compensating Pertamina for its sales of pertalite, which right now are taking place at about a 30% discount to the actual true market value of the fuel.
Pertalite is the knockdown basic petrol you get at a Pertamina station, right? It's the cheapest price regulated one. There's Pertamax and Pertalite.
In most petrol stations, that is now true. Yes, throughout history until this year, it has been premium. Is the worst fuel you can buy, and some parts of Indonesia you can still find premium, but increasingly now it's pertalite. We don't have the latest figures for the breakdown of what exactly Pertamina has been selling in terms of premium versus pertalite, but basically Pertamina is taking premium and mixing it 50-50 with Pertamax to produce pertalite.
And of course, the really pernicious thing is that these are subsidies. These are taxpayers' dollars. This government money is going to disproportionately benefit you and me. We drive cars.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, we're the ones who benefit, not the poor.
Yeah. I don't run my car on premium or even pertalite for that matter. I baby the engine, but it's a terrible subsidy for.
Scooters are rented.
It hurts equity to subsidize fuel because the major beneficiaries are car owners or motorcycle owners, even.
Right. So it's money that could be better spent and difficult to take away when you want to. I mean, people get used to free money. They see it as a birthright. And then when it comes time to claw it back, you can get riots.
Well, yes and no. I mean, actually, there are some techniques that have been proven to be effective in the past for overcoming that problem. Plus, you've got a president with approval rating in the mid 60s with virtually no political opposition. We know he's got carte blanche right now at the end of his presidency, the final 2.5 years, to do whatever the heck he wants, practically, short of amend the Constitution, apparently. But it's kind of a wasted opportunity to be spending this money on this priority. However, I would say that I think that the government will continue this only through Idul Fitri, which is coming up in less than a month. So, in fact, Luhut Panjaitan, the coordinating minister, has said that the government is going to raise energy prices in stages over the course of the remainder of the year. So that means there's going to be inflation that's going to hit consumer spending, household incomes, especially in the middle and upper class. But it's a good sign. The funny thing is that the president commissioner of Pertamina, Basuki Purnama, Ahok, former Jakarta governor, differed with Luhut and denied that there's a plan to raise fuel prices later this year. So remains to be seen.
That's great. Moment of zen there for a minute. Now let's talk about G20. Ashri Moriani told us that it is very difficult to get people to agree on an agenda. That it is a thorny time geopolitically, putting it mildly. We've heard from certainly the Australian Prime Minister. I didn't realize that Justin Trudeau in Canada has been quite so explicit, but he seems to be leaning towards not going as well. As G7 members start peeling away from the G20, you get this situation where you get these multilateral institutions are starting to split down the center. What is your view of the likelihood of a G20 summit at this point? Now we've seen the atrocities or evidence of alleged atrocities in Bucha, and complete lack of pushback from allies like China. What's it looking like? Is it going to happen, do you think?
No, I don't think so. Not at this rate. No, I think a full G20 with all 19 members, excluding Russia, is not likely, because one side or the other is going to back down, because China is fully backing Russia right now. The Chinese foreign minister talked with Indonesia's foreign minister Retno Marsudi last week and made a very clear message in the readout from the foreign ministry that China wants the G20 to avoid political topics and stick to economics. Of course, when we talked to the finance minister, she made clear that the two are intertwined, because the war is being fought with economics, with sanctions. So it's impossible to talk about the world economy without talking about the war. And then, of course, there's India and South Africa and Brazil, which are not particularly constructive right now, because they're keen to maintain various types of relations with Russia. So squaring that circle is not possible. The G20 is either going to be an enhanced G7, excluding Russia and China and a few others, or it's going to be just those countries and excluding most of the G7 countries. So it's a real pity, because the agenda for the G20 is crucial, especially climate change, but also pandemic response and preparedness and financial inclusion. There's a lot of constructive things that the process entails, and it's all very much in jeopardy right now. And this is very much in the near future here. It's imminent, because there's a whole series of preliminary meetings for the summit itself in late October. Those meetings will be unfolding. They already have been happening at lower levels, and it's been awkward. So it's going to be only more so, and some of them are probably going to fail to occur. The Treasury Secretary of the U.S., Janet Yellen, has called for the U.S. to boycott if Putin takes part in the G20. And probably a call like that is going to come forth soon from Anthony Blinken, too. So Indonesia is facing huge pressure right now, but they seem unwilling to defy either the U.S. or China, and so they're going to end up irking both probably in the end.
Yeah. What is the smart, self-interested thing for Indonesia to do here?
Yeah, to connect the dots and to disinvite Russia and to withstand the bluster from China, which in the end is only ever going to be bluster. Yeah.
Yeah. But I see their position. China is a huge source of funding, and there is this long tradition of not choosing sides, right? Between
which is a false tradition to begin with, because Suharto definitely chose sides in a major way for 32 years. And Indonesia proclaimed non-alignment while being extremely aligned with the United States. So first of all, it's a false tradition. Second of all, it's a luxury Indonesia can no longer afford, nor is it one that Indonesia should even aspire to, given its status now. Indonesia has grown, it has developed, and it's a thriving democracy, and it has stature. The world is looking desperately to Indonesia to show some leadership, and instead it's reverting to its notions of neutrality and that kind of a hallowed tradition. And it's neither feasible nor in Indonesia's self-interest.
It does require thinking ahead. in a way of if this happens, then this. And
Yeah.
so if we let Russia and China come and we don't speak up about Ukraine, then that does set a precedent for China feeling willing to do whatever the heck it wants. Taiwan, oh, that's South China Sea. South China Sea, we're in the South China Sea, and we're already having trouble with China. So if we don't push back in Ukraine, which is very, very far away, and we don't have a whole lot of trade with them, then we might get problems here at home. I'm not seeing any dot connecting there at all. In fact, I'm getting lots of. I'm getting lots of. Oh, they're very, very far away. Our trade isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, quite.
Hey, there's all this cheap Russian oil out in the market, so let's go get it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, on the contrary, Pertamina is buying substantial quantities of Russian crude oil and converting its Indramayu refinery in order to accommodate the characteristics of Russian crude.
Yeah, and so if you were a smart-ass reporter putting that to Luhut or to Retinol, saying, I mean, this is just going to come back to bite you in the ass, they're going to come back and say, we have to do what's in the best interest of Indonesians. Right now, there's a bunch of cheap crude out there. Don't tell me about your neo-colonial crap. I want to take care of my own people. And it's there's no rhetoric out there saying, well, taking care of my own people means thinking ahead and sort of thinking about we don't have to be in bed with the Americans to protect democracy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's plenty of other democratic countries in the world to emulate as well, including Taiwan or Japan or South Korea. Close to home, the Philippines is a democracy. So
they voted to get Russia off the UN, the UN Human Rights Commission, along with the Burmese junta. And if the Burmese junta doesn't want you on the Human Rights Commission, how far from the pack have you strayed?
Yeah, that goes into the aberration category, I think. But but the other thing is that Indonesia really needs to appreciate its gravitas in the international arena right now, which is increasingly tied to economic resources, especially in the case of China, which is highly dependent on imports of various resources, including Indonesian coal, among other things. So the idea that Indonesia needs to subordinate itself to the interest of China and basically show obeisance to China's guidance is wrong, because China needs to pay attention to Indonesia and respect Indonesia as a economic trading partner that it can't afford to jeopardize its relations with Indonesia.
Right. Yeah, it's got leverage. Definitely. Okay. Well, it's enough ranting between you and I. If only don't get invited to the palace that often, maybe because of this.
But I was surprised to hear that you had just learned about Trudeau's stance in Canada. I thought you were the one advising him. So.
Oh, look, he blocked me.
Really?
I accidentally sent some photos I shouldn't have sent.
Justin's loss.
We'll get into that another day. Great talking with you again. That was season 1. Sorry, that was episode 1, season 2. Smooth as always. One take. Ambassador Blake, welcome back to Reformasi Dispatch. It's great to have you.
Great to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
We'll get into climate change in just a minute, another existential threat. But I want to address the elephant in the room, and I want to pose an awkward hypothetical to you. Imagine you're back in the embassy in Jakarta, what I'm sure you call the good old days, and you've got Tony Blinken on the phone, and he's asking you, what do we do with the president? come October? Do we, or I think it's actually September, do we send them G20 or not? Because people are really divided. What would your advice be?
Well, my advice to him would probably be to allow me to talk to the Indonesians to see how set they are on inviting Putin, because I think that there's going to be growing pressure on Biden and indeed on other cabinet members to boycott any meetings, G20 meetings and other meetings that the Russians are sending their counterparts to. So I think the president is going to be increasingly boxed in by domestic politics and by, the EU and other allies, and by the continuing Russian atrocities that just make it very, very difficult to make any kind of concessions. So if I were them, I would be trying to explore with the Indonesians whether there are options available other than inviting Putin to the summit and other than inviting ministers. So I don't know what those would be. I'd have to talk to see what the parameters and the contours of an agreement might be. But for example, could we invite Russia to come to attend at a lower level so that maybe a minister represents Putin instead of Putin himself? Maybe there's a possibility that they could attend by Zoom or something like that. Something that would in some way diminish Russia's level, but would still allow them to participate in some manner so that the Indonesians could be responsive to Chinese pressures.
And that's the other shoe, right? That needs to drop. So how would the Chinese?
Right. So the Chinese are, of course, pushing for them to allow full participation by Putin at, head of state level. But as you know, there are several heads of state, Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Morrison, have already said that they're not going to attend if Putin is there. And I imagine if these Russian atrocities keep up, that there's going to be a greater groundswell among at least the G7 and possibly others as well, not to attend. So again, I think the more interesting question is for Indonesian diplomacy is whether they can explore with the Russians some lower level participation by the Russians, because otherwise they're going to have a terrible problem on their hands. And you may have seen Janet Yellen testified earlier this week to a congressional committee, and she said, "Look, I'm not going to attend any meetings where my Russian counterparts are." And she implied that at least that Biden was going to make the same decision, although the White House has been a little bit more careful about what they're saying.
Well, right, and it's April. I mean, why would they?
They're trying to allow themselves a little bit of leeway.
That was my question: is when I buy a plane ticket, I usually do it about 1 or 2 weeks ahead of time. With the president of the United States, when does this all have to crystallize, do you think?
That's a good question.
Yeah, generally a few weeks at least, and if not more. For these big summits, they know well ahead of time what the dates are. So I'm sure it's tentatively on the president's calendar, but the only question again is what the details are. And so, but I'm sure they'll try to sort this out well before that. And it's going to come up for decision in terms of some of these ministerials, because there's going to be a G20 ministerial in the summer, and there are going to be, of course, finance minister meetings and others. So I think those are going to help kind of set the table for whatever the head of state decision is.
Right. Yeah, the low-level meetings so far have been happening with the other participants turning their video cameras off during these virtual meetings together with Russian counterparts so far.
Right. But I think the other kind of point to stress to your listeners and to your readers is that this is a real shame, and I'm not blaming the United States for isolating the Russians. It's absolutely the right thing to do, but the Russian actions in Ukraine are going to just further weaken the international system and all of these various multilateral institutions that exist to mobilize global action on important things like climate change. And, if we're already facing a problem in the UN Security Council where the United States and China and Russia are vetoing each other's resolutions, so it's difficult to get real action to protect peace and security in the Security Council. And again, you're going to start to see some of these big global institutions like the G20, APEC, begin to break down, and that has a real impact. These are useful mechanisms to mobilize global action on global trade and on climate change and on COVID and a whole range of other things. And that's, I think it's going to hurt our overall efforts, and it's a shame. And I think people get very focused on the personalities and all that, but I think the other thing for people to remember is the real practical impact on some of these important priorities that we have.
Yeah.
Kevin, you want to take that off ramp into climate change?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, on that note, what type of progress are you seeing with regard to climate action in Indonesia from a bilateral standpoint with the U.S. thus far? I think you did a trip to Jakarta just last month.
Yeah. Well, maybe first of all, it might be useful just to explain a little bit, why Indonesia? I mean, why did we choose Indonesia, and why did we choose to prioritize them? And we went through a process where we looked at, first of all, the countries with the largest greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And then secondly, countries that we judged would be willing to work with us, which rules out large emitters like Russia, for example.
China.
And potentially China as well these days. That's right. But then third, also, countries that are really willing to increase their climate ambition, who are increase their nationally determined contributions, their emissions pledges, and really make a significant difference. And so we judged that Indonesia was one of a small group of countries that met all of those criteria. And of course, it's a strategically important partner for the United States. We have a strategic partnership with Indonesia that we established during my time there. And of course, they're the largest Muslim majority democracy in the world, the largest and most important country in ASEAN, et cetera. So we decided that, where should we focus in Indonesia? Probably on coal, because that's where their greenhouse gas emissions are largest and where they're likely to continue. Oil, right now, their consumption of oil and gas is about the same, but oil is going to continue to decline, whereas coal is going to continue to be an important source. So if we can help Indonesia to move the needle on coal and accelerate decommissioning of coal, that could make a real difference to helping Indonesia to increase the ambition of its nationally determined contribution, but also to help the global efforts to stop, fossil fuels. So that's what we went in with. And so this trip that I led with my Treasury counterpart, John Morton, we went in and we basically said, look, we'd like to be able to establish an initiative to accelerate coal decommissioning. And at the end of that, we hope that Indonesia will be in a position to be able to announce, one, a more ambitious nationally determined contribution, and secondly, and most importantly, a commitment to an earlier end date for the pipeline of new coal-fired power plants. And then third, of course, a commitment to accelerate renewable energy growth to backfill behind the coal that's going to be decelerated. So, I think Indonesia agreed in principle to that. They've always said that they're prepared to be more ambitious if they can get international financing. And I think hopefully they were not talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, as sometimes they do in public statements. They were more, I think, rational about how much is really possible. And they were looking at the deal that was signed by the United States and others with South Africa in the last Conference of Parties in Glasgow. And so they were hoping to get some, a comparable kind of deal, a multi-billion-dollar deal to help Indonesia. And that's certainly what we envision as well. So the next steps, again, are for us, for our experts on both sides, to get together and try to define what the contours of such a deal might look like in terms of the number of coal-fired power plants, and then the financing that we could bring to the table to help with accelerate this decommissioning. And again, we were very clear that a really important part of this has got to be Indonesia's commitment to accelerate renewable energy growth. And, quite frankly, they're a little bit behind schedule, even on their own rather slow timetable for renewable energy. As you know, they hope to have renewables constitute roughly 23% of their energy by 2025, and they're not really even there yet. I mean, they're not on track to meet that right now. And so we said, it's going to be very important for Indonesia to be prepared to undertake the reforms that will be necessary to allow renewable energy development to really flourish in Indonesia. And that includes things like increasing the tariffs for things like solar and wind and geothermal, but also to streamline the PLN process for power purchase agreements. It's a very, very slow process that has kind of a deterrent effect for investors. So they need to speed that up. And so, so we were talking in some detail about some of these issues. And again, I think the Indonesians understand those issues and are willing to, take a hard look at that. But this has all got to be part of the package because, again, we want to not only see this progress on coal, but there's got to be energy behind it to backfill, and preferably it's got to be renewable energy and not more fossil fuels.
Yeah, so many questions here. One thing that comes to mind is other countries are going to be seizing this opportunity to move into renewables, especially Australia, which I think is supplying solar power to Singapore, for example.
Right.
Do you envision an opportunity for interests to align here where some of the incumbents in the energy sector see a self-interest in rushing into renewables and moving away from coal?
Absolutely. I mean, this is going to be a multilateral initiative. In other words, we've always been clear that this is going to be an effort that would be led by the United States and probably the Japanese. And we'll pull together a multi-donor coalition that would not only include countries like other G7 partners, as well as countries that have a kind of strategic interest in Indonesia, like the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. But then secondly, philanthropical capital, Jeff Bezos and Mike Bloomberg and the other large philanthropies in the United States have a great interest in playing a significant role in these and other initiatives. And then, of course, private capital from Wall Street, banks and other investors. John Kerry has been very, very active talking to all of these stakeholders, not only about Indonesia, but about a range of other countries. And there's plenty of money to go around. The real thing that everybody's chasing are sort of bankable projects that they can get behind. So I think they welcome this effort, and of course it's a very open tent. We'd love to see, as you say, countries like Australia and others proceed with all of their investments in these areas, and that can only be additive and a positive contribution.
Now, I wanted to ask you though. I mean, the bankable projects, they really rely on sort of the political will on the top, and I think Kevin would agree that there doesn't seem to be that sort of commitment. I think, Kevin, didn't you say that 6 cabinet members and agency heads have coal projects? And you were talking about the tariffs of solar and wind.
Yeah.
Then reversed the tariffs. They canceled an idea where they would pay to feed in electricity.
Yeah, I mean, again, we were pretty clear up front that part of this agreement has got to be a commitment to deal with these structural impediments that now exist. And again, I think we got a commitment from the Indonesians to do that, and so we'll certainly we'll certainly continue to push on that because it's in their own interest to do these things. These are all things that are not going to benefit the United States. These are things that are going to benefit Indonesia and help to bring down costs for not only for their consumers but for businesses and so forth. So this is going to be an economic boon for them as well.
Yeah, banks are not financing new coal-fired power plants, so that's really
Well, not just banks, other countries too. Other countries are getting out of the coal financing business. So so now's the time for them to again remove some of these impediments that have existed.
Yeah, and I wonder too if these conglomerates are going to be happy to get out from under their deals with PLN so that they can export their coal to buyers who pay more. But be that as it may, maybe
skepticism.
yeah, maybe.
And again, every country in the world is going to be under pressure to diversify out of fossil fuels, and there's just the financiers are going to be more and more reluctant to finance those kinds of projects because of reputational risk and because of their shareholders are just going to rebel if they do that. So I think coal is on its way out. It's going to take a while because a lot of them are in long-term projects, but there's a rush for the exits that's taking place here.
So can you tell us a bit about the nuts and bolts of these long-term projects and how to decommission a power plant? And
I really can't. I mean, I'm kind of operating at the kind of senior level, and then we have a lot of much smarter people than me who are going to work out the details of this. We have, particularly folks in the U.S. Agency for International Development who have worked for years and years and years with their counterparts in the PLN and in the energy ministry. And so they are the ones who are going to do the hard spade work that can then be teed up to the political level. So I don't want to pretend that I'm some great expert on all these issues.
Yeah. But suffice to say, there's going to be a need for money from somewhere for somebody. Yeah.
Absolutely. But again, Kerry is very fond of saying that, reminding people that money is really not the problem. There's quite a lot of money going around from all the different sources that I talked about. It's mustering that political will that you talked about on the part of these countries to step up and tee up these kinds of big deals. And again, we think this is in their long-term interests, and it's something that's going to redound to their benefit.
How about the climate change mitigation? Is that part of your remit?
Well, we do have, that's not part of my remit, but we do have extensive programs through USAID and others on helping countries with adaptation. And that's a very important piece of it. Another important piece that I should mention is what we call the just transition. And that means that they're inevitably in a place like Indonesia, as they begin to phase out coal, that's going to have quite a significant impact on some parts of Indonesia where, for example, coal mining is really the lead sector and the lead employer. So in many parts of Kalimantan, for example, there's going to need to be an effort over, over the medium term to, as the country phases out of coal, to figure out ways to provide a new training and new employment for the miners and the coal, the people who are being employed at these coal plants. And that's a very significant effort. We began consultations on that with civil society organizations, but also with the government. And so that's going to be another part of this. And these are not easy questions. In many cases, the miners are in many cases illiterate and not terribly well educated. So you're not going to suddenly have them become members of the digital economy and join Tokopedia. They're going to have to probably be retrained to be farmers or fishermen or some comparable thing there in Kalimantan. In some cases, there'll be construction work. As you know, there's a big effort underway to set up a new a special economic zone in eastern Kalimantan. So construction work could be a potential opportunity. But those are the kinds of things that are going to have to be thought through in considerable detail.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to get into that more. Our interview guest next week is Joe Manchin, so he can tell us about. No, just kidding.
But can I ask a question to both
Please.
of you? And it's about the degree to which it's in the Indonesian consciousness, climate change, as opposed to something that's there was such a struggle in rich countries to make it something that was, the next generation's problem. It was tomorrow's problem. It was very conceptual, and drought, fires in Australia, heat waves in places like British Columbia, crazy. That's really crystallized in the minds of a lot of Western democracies. What's your sense of the buy-in among the regular Indonesian voters to the point that they're not going to be scared off by energy security notions that coal is fine, that we need to embrace renewables? So where are we in that journey?
Well, I think there's still a lot more work that needs to be done inside Indonesia to raise awareness about climate change, particularly as you get away from Jakarta itself. But I do think that awareness has grown since I was there. Already when I was ambassador, we were doing a lot of efforts to raise awareness about climate change and raise awareness about the impact on Indonesia of, increasing severity of storms, the increased flooding. Obviously, everybody already knows that 1/4 of Jakarta is underwater every year, and that's one of the reasons that Jokowi's decided to move the capital to Kalimantan. So I think as the rains and as the floods and as these natural disasters have occurred with growing frequency and growing severity in Indonesia, as they have in our own country, awareness has grown that the reason for this is because of climate change. But again, it's a lot more work still needs to be done, because they're not necessarily connecting all the dots of why this is happening and what are the changes that need to take place in Indonesia so that it's going to play its own very important role in this global priority. I don't know, Kevin, you agree?
Yeah, very much so. I think there's regional heads who are very open and enthusiastic about an energy transition, so that's promising. But I think a lot of the public still expects to have fixed prices for electricity and petrol. But on the other hand, you've got a president right now with the power and the political capital to raise those prices a little bit, within reason, and make a move in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about, guys, and maybe we should just mention it because it is important, is the whole forest and land use side of this equation.
Sure.
Which is still the largest source of Indonesia's greenhouse gas emissions right now. But I think it's important for your viewers to know that Indonesia actually has come quite a long way. Unlike its progress on it, relatively halting progress on renewable energy, they've actually made quite a lot of progress in terms of stopping deforestation and delinking progress on palm oil from deforestation. And they've also made quite a lot of progress in stopping the fires. I remember when I was there in 2015, they were estimating that the amount of carbon that was released by the fires in both Kalimantan and Sumatra was the equivalent of Germany's national greenhouse gas emissions for that entire year. So a huge amount. And so it became a really big priority for them to basically set up their equivalent of a rapid reaction force to get on top of small fires quickly and to educate small farmers that, look, you shouldn't be starting fires that are going to then turn into these huge fires that are going to burn out of control for days and weeks. So they have made quite a lot of progress on the fire control issue as well. And so, they now have this net zero target of 2030 for their forest and land use area, which is great and really important. But also, let's be fair, there are challenges. The government still wants to increase production of palm oil, and they're particularly interested in substituting biofuels from palm oil. And so, I think one of the questions is, are they going to be able to do that in a sustainable way that enables them to maintain their relatively good record of keeping deforestation rates down? And yes, they are doing a lot to restore. I think 2 million hectares of peatlands is one of their goals, and then they want to rehabilitate like 6 times that. I think it's 12 million hectares of degraded lands by 2030. So there is an effort underway for replanting and restoration that's quite important. But nonetheless, they're going to have to really, I think, watch closely the palm oil and make sure that doesn't lead to a new accelerated deforestation.
The backslide. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with the palm oil price right now, creates a huge incentive for anybody to go out and plant a palm oil tree.
Although it was interesting when I met with the Minister of Environment and Forest, Minister Siti Nurbaya, she produced a little chart that showed that they, in fact, have been able to decouple palm oil production from palm oil prices, and that even though palm oil prices have continued to rise, that the palm oil production has not risen concomitantly. So which is good. So it shows that there has been a positive effort on their part.
Well, that takes us to about 30 minutes, Ambassador. Is there anything else you want to? I mean, there's a million things we could.
Right.
It's such a huge topic. We are deeply grateful. But anything you want to?
Well, I just want to say, I think we have to give some credit to our friends in the Indonesian government for willing to take this on, for willing to be ambitious and to think ambitiously about coal decommissioning. I mean, we've seen in our own country how difficult that can be. So we're at the beginning of this effort now. There's going to be some hard decisions that are going to have to be made. But we're cautiously optimistic that this is going to succeed, and that at the end of this, we'll be able to announce an initiative that leads to accelerated coal decommissioning, but also has some important steps that Indonesia will take to allow for the acceleration of renewable energy. So, and if that happens, that will be quite a big victory, not only for Indonesia, but for global climate efforts. So a lot of hard work ahead, but there's a good result at the end of the rainbow there.
Super, Ambassador Blake. Thank you so much. It was great to be with you today.
Great. Nice to talk to you guys.
Let us know when you're in town.
Sorry?
Let us know when you're in town. We'll get some goreng on.
Absolutely.
There's more to talk about. And that's the pod. Thanks so much to former Ambassador Blake for joining us. Our editing and sound engineering is done by Stephen Hendel. Our music is courtesy of Blue Dot Sessions. For a free trial of Kevin's Reformasi weekly newsletter, go to reformasi.info. And if you're listening to us through a podcast app, please subscribe and share us on social media. It would be a big help. As always, you can reach us at hello@onthelevel.id. This podcast is a production of On the Level Media. I'm Jeff Hutton. Bye for now.